Experiencing content. Yeah, it's time to do another one of these. Wake up. Come on. Yep, that's you. That's right. Do it. Come on, another video. So today, I wanted to help one of my favorite human beings on planet Earth, my hero, and I guess idol for game design and game philosophy and games, Ken Levine. Ken Levine has been in the industry for basically forever, and he has made amazing, incredible, great, all-time classic, fantastic video games. A lot of them are like unbelievably brilliant, and some of them are my favorite games of all time. Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, and I really, really, really am intrigued by everything he does and touches, every podcast he is on, every time he gives a GDC talk, anytime he does anything, I'm there. I will follow him to the ends of the earth. He can do no wrong in my eyes. And so I'm so intrigued and invested in whatever he's working on next, which is this mystery project he's been doing for like at least now it's almost 3 years, and doesn't have a big team. I don't know what the budget is. Have no idea what it's about or anything. The only thing we know is that it is apparently going to be very different from what he has done before. In a particular sense, I guess there is a sort of quest he is striving to go on. There is a goal. There's a problem he's trying to solve, and that is detailed in this GDC talk he gave about what he wants to do with his next game. So let's run the clip.
So it's our initial scratching in there to try to figure out a way to really make player-driven, these are the key words, player-driven, replayable narrative. Okay, so I want to say one thing. A lot of times these talks are like, well, don't record this, don't do it, don't take pictures, don't do anything like that. This is completely open source. Take pictures, film it, put it on the internet, whatever you want to do. You know, do a riff tracks to it. I don't care.
Oh, thanks, Ken. So yeah, so he does this hour-long talk about trying to create this replayable, single-player, narratively driven game, and he goes into Lego pieces and building blocks and using examples from other games, and I really want to help Ken. Secretly, I want him to hire me, because I really desperately want to work for a genius. So please, Ken, watch this video, and let me help you help me make your next game. I want you to crack the code. I want you to make a game that is single player and insanely replayable, and is narratively driven. And I don't want you to have to make an esports game for people to be playing it for years on end and talk about it forever. I want you to be able to crack the code. So here are my tips. Here are some options you can take to make your your next game, to make what you wanted to set out to achieve. Now again, if you want to invent a new idea, go for it. I'm sure you are capable of that while writing screenplays and doing TV things and making games. But here are some alternative options from other games you can sort of cherry pick from, and I'll sort of list them out, and then give me a call, we'll talk through it, and then I'll fly myself in, and then you can have me clean the bathrooms. I don't care. You can hire me as a janitor, please, anything. So option one, just have an insane amount of content. Just so much content people can never get through it. An example of this is a game that I've been playing for years now. I have several hundred hours in this game, and I have not scratched the surface on unlockable characters and items and enemies and stages. And that's The Binding of Isaac, which is a roguelike that uses RNG, or random number generators, and randomizes literally everything. And there's just an insane amount of content, and you really, really, really have to play that game almost infinitely to be able to unlock everything, unless you're just godlike at it. So that's option one. Just fill your game with so much crap, whether it be good or bad, that people will never be able to touch the surface, the tip of the iceberg, and they'll have to play it forever. Option two is to rip off Dark Souls. And I know that Dark Souls is a game that has been talked about to death and analyzed to death, and there are plenty of people in the game development industry and community who essentially just rip off ideas from that game wholeheartedly. So you could just make a Dark Souls game. Tons of in-game progress to your character, whether it be leveling or collecting items or new game plus, making different kits, different builds, different weapons, and different armor sets, and exploration and secrets and collectibles and optional areas and boss fights. That game is almost the perfect template for how you want to make a replayable single player game. Now, narratively driven, not quite so. There are a lot of really cool, nifty environmental storytelling bits to Dark Souls, and there's a lot of like hints at things, and it sort of lets people sort of put it all together, the pieces. But I'm sure you could add upon that. You could totally make that game not a Bioshock 3, but whatever the hell next thing you have an idea for. So option 2, rip off Dark Souls. Alternatively, sort of an option 3 is instead of ripping off Dark Souls, you can sort of go in a different direction. You could sort of take a lot of influences from Dungeons and Dragons, if you're not into video games, or Dishonored 2, which is a game that I am playing for the second time, mostly because there is a second character with their own story, their own set of dialogue and voice lines, a new voice actor, and replaying that game again, first as Emily and second as Corvo, and doing it on a different difficulty with different powers, that's a definite surefire way to get people to replay your game and go through a different perspective through the narrative. Again, there's a lot of stuff that you don't really have to change. NPCs, dialogues, main quests, side quests. You can keep a lot of that stuff very similar if there's a particular set of goals you want your characters to go through, like Emily and Corvo want to murder everybody in Karnaka and Dunwall, but you could just do that. You could sort of take a D&D approach to having people sort of have multiple reasons for playing, have multiple characters to play, really flesh out each person you're playing as. That's also an option. Option 4, create a world that is so much fun to be in, I will go out of my way to replay it for the rest of my life. And also included in that is add the greatest music any ears can ever receive. Any person can listen to music, but make somebody want to enter a world and listen to a soundtrack as good as Super Mario Galaxy or Katamari Damacy. Now, of course, I've brought up Katamari Damacy in literally every video I've ever made, but there is a reason I want to return to that series, and I don't care how old and rote the gameplay can be over years and years of it just sort of being the same game. It never gets stale to me. It never gets repetitive, including the Mario games. Like I want to go back to those worlds. I want to go back to the Mushroom Kingdom so many times because it is not only just sort of nostalgic and familiar, but the mechanics are so sound and the world is so much fun to be in and amazing, and the music is just so fucking good that I will go out of my way to just, at any point when I need to pick me up, I'll go back and I'll just replay an old Mario game or an old Katamari game. Now, again, that's a little harder to do with a small team, create a world and create music that is all-time good. But that's an option for you if you want to do that. So, there you go. Just rip off Nintendo and Mario, I guess, is an option? Maybe? Option 5 is sort of taking a lot of ideas from the Fallout series, and I know that that game is open world, check, has a ton of side quests, check, walking very slowly across a huge world, double check, but you could do a thing in Fallout where obviously the narrative is very dynamic, so you can go out of sequence and you can murder different people and other sort of branches will pop up. That's all sort of discussed in your GDC talk, but you could do a morality system. You could really play with being good or evil or being right in the middle, neutral, and I feel like that's the most important thing, is letting you know where you stand, letting the player totally pick and choose what way they want to go, if halfway through they have a come to Jesus moment, or halfway through they just feel like being evil, or if they just want to stay neutral. The Fallout is, well, I was going to say the Fallout series, but especially 3, because they got rid of it in 4, but Fallout 3 in particular, which is the best Bethesda game, you heard it here first, folks, That game did morality better than any other game, better than Fable and better than Mass Effect. So you could totally make a very endless replayable, narratively driven single player game, making your character go through the highs and lows of morality. You could really make them choose to have themselves an arc of redemption or corruption, and do it in an interesting manner. I feel like that is totally achievable. So there's another option: is ripping out Fallout 3, one of the greatest games of all time. That is basically replayable forever because of how many options there are. Option 6. You could take the Shadow of Mordor mechanic where you sort of seek revenge on people, and then there's a bunch of orcs or whoever you have in your game rank up and climb the chain of command, and you sort of taking out certain people promotes other people, and then it creates rivalries, and then you have like a sort of a motive to go and kill people, or characters will remember you and say, hey, I killed you the last time and I got promoted to lieutenant, and then I'll be a general when I kill you again, and then you can kill that guy and find their replacement, and like making interesting enemies just out of these cool little, narrative beats that you sort of put in there just because you let the player do most of the work, like not having to give them huge backstories, but giving them names and giving them weaknesses and pros, and sort of letting the player do most of the legwork. I can't fucking believe no one stole that idea from Shadow of Mordor since. That is such an ingenious idea. I really would have expected it to show up in an open world game by now or something, but no one has touched it, and they haven't made Shadow of Mordor 2 yet, or at least announce it. So just do that. Holy shit, that's such an easy thing to do. Option 7 is to break your game up into little downloadable bite-sized chunks, and make it episodic, so you really lengthen the game by adding levels and objectives and really cleaning up the game and listening to feedback and sort of making it a drawn-out sort of TV show-like thing, akin to the most recent Hitman game, which a lot of people really love. And that game really does it through its stealth mechanics and doesn't really do it through the narrative mostly. I mean, it gives you, a reason and an objective and who you're killing and why and stuff. But I like what that game is doing, and I feel like there's an opportunity to really pick up the slack in terms of narrative and totally make a television season out of playing a game. That will make your game super replayable and have legs, especially if there are options to do each mission or each episode in different ways, sort of like the Telltale games, which, different dialogue trees, hard decisions to make, killing different people in cool locations around the world as a hitman. Just the thought. You could just do that, But whatever, up to you. But that's another option for you, Ken Levine. Option 8. Make your game like the Stanley Parable, which is literally a super long game, not because it is one linear story that takes 12 hours to beat. It is comprised of a gazillion different branching paths, and that adds to the length, and it makes you go back and literally redo that game, because each one of the sort of little segments is only about 5 to 10 minutes, but there are so many 5 to 10 minute sort of chunks to it, and you have to sort of keep breaking left or right at so many different paths throughout that game that it really adds legs to it. So you can make a game that it adds and expands to that idea from the Stanley Parable, and just make your game filled with so many of those that there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of ways to finish it, and it makes you go back and just try to do it again, sort of like in pachinko when the ball sort of falls between the pegs and it just bounces one way or the other, and there's so many different sort of endpoints that no one person could have the same sort of ending as you, because you chose the path, you chose the options. Now, you could also make your game super funny like the Stanley Parable. I would love that, because that's one of the funniest games ever made. You could also do something similar to Jazz Punk, where you allow people to go through that game again with a commentary track and sort of poke at all the dumb jokes and all the stupid gizmos and gadgets and little side gags and stuff. That is an option if you want people to really go back and sort of go through the game with different added layers of perspective. Just create an insane amount of cool options like that. Now, option 9 is a cop-out because it's essentially making your game a sim. Now, I know that at the beginning of your GDC talk you said you didn't want to do that, because even though they were your favorite games ever, that is not necessarily the best way to do narrative games. That gives the players a lot of choices in how they construct the world and destroy the world, and you're sort of a god perspective, and you have to click and play with all the minutia like Civilization or like Roller Coaster Tycoon. But you could do that, and you could really just jam in as much narrative as possible and outdo those games, because the fun is making the narrative out of the weird theme park I create and naming all the stupid shit. And they give you like really, really, really simple goals. Like, so the tasks you're doing are simple, and you sort of make the fun out of it the only way you can, which is sort of, trapping people in the park and killing them and charging them $10 to get into the bathrooms. But I feel like the sim space can really, really gain forward, momentum-driven, great writing. It's just like a narrative that just like totally outdoes the, okay, you got 10 years, build a civilization. Because that can only sort of get you so far. Option 10, create an AI director that builds and customizes and changes the game and the world and the narrative around you as you're going through it to suit your needs or to suit the player and their style, a la Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead was an insanely replayable game, and it only had like 4 or 5 campaigns, but you went through those campaigns and the paths were different, the enemy placements were different, the items were different, the sort of rhythm and the cadence and the flow to different encounters and the way you went through each of the campaigns was never the same twice, because there was an AI director constantly adjusting to you. And that is really cool. That makes your game very replayable, and there's absolutely no way you can make a story any dumber than zombies invade, march through them to somewhere, and then the somewhere ends up not being anywhere. Then you gotta start it all over again because your bus ran out of gas or your plane crashed or fucking whatever. A lot of lazy storytelling in zombie games and movies and TV shows and comics because it's really easy to do. But that's an option for you if you want to be like Valve. Or you could just take up Valve and say, hey, let me make Half-Life 3, and then boom, you're done. Option 11, add as much loot to your game like Diablo or Borderlands 2 as possible, and make people replay that shit because there is so much loot. And then you can start to write around the loot. You can add loot to the narrative, and you can make stories about the loot. It doesn't have to be a gun. It could be whatever you want. But there is absolutely nothing that is played more and more and more and more over the years than Diablo 2. I know so many people who go back and play Diablo 2 because that loot grind is so addictive. Our stupid monkey brains enjoy the pleasure of ones and zeros popping up and saying that they got a legendary item when it doesn't exist. People love that shit. It's like the lottery or a slot machine, and people will give their money to these games. I do love Borderlands, though, so just add a lot of loot in there. That's a really easy way to trick stupid, puny humans and their simple, dumb brains. Just trick their minds. Just add in loot. It's so simple. And you know who's super easy to trick? Children, because they're idiots. I don't know, you could, like, create a game and then split it into 2 with very minor differences, and then release the 2 games at once, and then make children catch something. I don't know, monsters. Just make 700 to 800 monsters that fit into their pockets. Wait. Where have I heard that idea before? What game did that already? I don't know. And finally, you could just make a game like Bloodborne that has a lot of the elements I have mentioned beforehand, but you have to replay it not because of the narrative necessarily, but because you're mastering the combat. You are mastering the game. You are going back and you're playing that game over, not just to experience all of the content, name of the show, but to really, really master something. Master the narrative, master the mechanics, master the world, master the enemies. And I feel like Bloodborne, whether it be PvE or PvP, like, you go through that game and you have to learn to be good, and it teaches you to be good, and by the end you are good, and you are a master of that domain. And Bloodborne is a great way to make a single player game very replayable. Now, you could just essentially rip off Metal Gear Solid 5, which to me is one of the best games ever, and is one of the most replayable single player games with a ton of narrative in there. And that game takes elements from all the options I've listed. All the games that I mentioned have some sort of a little hook that Metal Gear Solid 5 sort of took from and used. And that game is like the perfect single player game to just get good at and replay, and the world changes around you, and like all of the things that I have listed, I feel like bits of them are in Metal Gear Solid 5. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is, Ken, you can either figure this out your own way, or you can just make one of the best games ever. And simply by making one of the best games ever and making it single player, you have achieved the goal of making the most replayable single player game. Just knock it out of the ballpark, like Kojima did with Metal Gear Solid 5. So, there you go. That's it. I hope I have helped you, Ken. Follow me on Twitter, at Jared Russo. And I hope I've been a help to you and anyone else who happened to have watched this video, but I really made it for you. I made this personally to you because you've brought so much happiness and joy to my life, and you've opened my eyes. You lifted a veil over my face where I was not seeing the whole world, and now I have. And I really want to help you out in the only way that I can, which is to make a fucking long-winded video on the internet and put it up and hope that you watch it when you're eating lunch during a lunch break. So, there you go. Thanks.